The Vryn base camp was built in the ruins of the old human colony, Day's colony, the place where he had lived as a child, before the plague, before the evacuation, before everything changed. Walking through it now felt like stepping into a ghost's memory. The buildings he remembered playing around were still standing, but they looked different, surrounded by Vryn equipment and technology. Tents made of strange, shimmering material filled the old streets. Vehicles that floated above the ground without making sound. Lights that glowed without any visible power source. 2 warriors carried Lyra on a stretcher. Day walked beside Thorn at the front of the column. The other warriors surrounded them in a protective formation. Day noticed that they watched him carefully, not with hostility exactly, but with intense curiosity. He was probably the first human most of them had ever seen. They reached a large tent at the center of the camp. Inside, medical equipment hummed and blinked with lights. Vryn medics took Lyra immediately and began working on her leg with tools Day did not recognize. She looked back at him once before they closed a privacy screen around her. Her expression said, "Trust me, it will be okay." Thorn gestured for Day to follow him to a different tent. This one was clearly a command center. Maps covered the walls, some showing the planet from orbit, others showing detailed ground terrain. Day recognized some landmarks: the river, the mountains, his cave. A table stood in the center with what looked like holographic displays floating above it. Technology so far beyond human achievement that Day could barely comprehend it. "Sit," Thorn said, pointing at a chair. "You must be tired, hungry." Day sat carefully. The chair adjusted to his body automatically, supporting him in a way that felt impossibly comfortable. A warrior brought food on plates. The items were strange, alien, but the smell was good. Day's stomach growled loudly. "Eat," Thorn said. "We will talk after." Day ate. The food was different from anything he had tasted before. Some items were sweet, others savory with spices he could not identify. But it was good. More importantly, there was a lot of it. He ate until his stomach ached from being too full, something he had not experienced in years. While he ate, Thorn worked at the holographic displays, his large fingers moving through the light with surprising delicacy. He seemed to be reading reports or reviewing data. Occasionally, he would pause and look at Day with an expression that was hard to read. When Day finished eating, Thorn turned away from his work and sat across from him. "I have questions," the war captain said. "You will answer truthfully. This is not interrogation. I simply need to understand." "I will answer," Day said. "How long have you been alone on this planet?" 12 years. Thorn's eyes widened slightly. 12 years. You were a child. I was 7 when they left. I'm 19 now. They? Who left? Day took a breath and told the story. About the plague that swept through the colony. About the evacuation ships that came too late with too little space. About the terrible choice the adults made to send the children who were not too sick, promising to send more ships back for the rest. But no ships came back. Day finished quietly. Maybe they could not. Maybe they forgot. Maybe everyone died from the plague. I do not know. I waited at the landing field for 3 years. Then I stopped waiting. Thorn listened in silence. When Day finished, the war captain's face was troubled. You are not the only one who survived? There are others. Maybe 7 or 8 scattered across the planet. We do not talk much. We survive better alone. But sometimes I see signs. Smoke in the distance, tracks. We know we are not completely alone. Thorn stood and walked to one of the maps. He touched it and the display changed, showing heat signatures across the planet's surface. 7, he said, pointing at 7 small red dots scattered across the continents. We detected these before. We thought they were large animals, not children surviving alone for 12 years. He turned back to Day, and for the first time, something like respect showed clearly on his face. Do you know what we were taught about humans? Thorn asked. Day shook his head. We were taught that humans are weak, that you run from battle, that you abandon your worlds at the first sign of danger, that you have no honor, no courage, no strength worth respecting. He gestured at the map, at the 7 surviving humans. This is what we were going to report to our high command, that Talvian 9 was abandoned by cowards, that humanity was not worthy of negotiation or alliance, that we should take your worlds because you do not have the strength to hold them. Day felt cold despite the warm tent. And now? Thorn walked to a console and began accessing files. Information scrolled past on the holographic display. Now I have questions about what we were taught. So I am looking at your colony's records, the files that were left behind when you evacuated. He read in silence for several minutes. Day watched his face change as he read. Surprise, then sadness, then something that looked like anger. The plague killed 60% of your colony in 3 weeks, Thorn read aloud. The evacuation ships arrived with space for 400 passengers. You had 900 colonists remaining, most of them sick or dying. He scrolled through more data. The colony leaders made a choice: send every child who could survive the journey, even the sick ones, gambling they would recover with proper medical care. The adults stayed behind. All of them. Every single adult volunteered to stay so more children could be saved. Thorn looked at Day. They were promised return ships within 2 months. The ships never came. According to these records, 3 weeks after the evacuation, your people received a message. The plague had spread to the evacuation fleet. They were under quarantine. They could not return. What happened to them? Day asked, his voice barely a whisper. The records do not say. The last message was sent 20 years ago. After that silence, Thorn closed the files and sat down heavily. This is not cowardice. This is sacrifice. Your people chose death so that children might live. That is... He paused, searching for words. That is the highest form of courage we recognize. Day felt tears building but refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. The children who made it to the ships, he said. Did any survive? Did they find homes? I do not know, but I will find out. I promise you this. Thorn stood and began pacing, his mind clearly working through a problem. My mission here was to establish a forward base for invasion. The Vryn Empire wants to expand into this sector. We were told humans were weak and would not resist effectively. He stopped and looked at Day. But I cannot report that anymore. Not truthfully. How can I call a species weak when their children survive alone for 12 years? How can I call them cowards when parents sacrifice themselves for their young? How can I recommend invasion of a species that values honor and courage as much as we do? What will you do? Day asked. I will tell the truth. I will report what I found. Not weakness, but strength. Not cowards, but survivors. He activated a communication device and spoke in his own language. After a moment, a holographic image appeared. Another Vryn, even older than Thorn, with markings that suggested very high rank. Thorn and the hologram spoke for several minutes. Thorn gestured at Day several times. The other Vryn looked skeptical at first, then increasingly interested. Finally, Thorn showed the officer the image from his armor's recording system. The moment when 50 warriors knelt before a human boy. The holographic officer was silent for a long time. Then he spoke one word. Thorn nodded and ended the transmission. What did he say? Day asked. He said, remarkable. He wants to meet you. He is coming here personally. Who is he? High Commander Vex. He leads all Vryn forces in this sector. What I report to him will determine the future of human-Vryn relations. Thorn sat back down and looked at Day seriously. I have a request. The other surviving humans on this planet, can you help us find them? I want them to receive proper care. Medical treatment, food, shelter, they have survived long enough alone. Day thought about this. About Tay, who he sometimes saw smoke signals from. About Rin, who left marks on trees to show safe foraging areas. About Quan, who carved stories into rock faces. About the others whose names he did not know but whose presence he felt across the wilderness. They will be afraid, Day said. They have hidden from everything for 12 years. They will not trust easily. That is why I need you to come with us, to show them it is safe, that we mean no harm. And if I do this, what happens after? What happens to us? Thorn was quiet for a moment. I do not know the future, but I know this. The Talvar my daughter swore to you is sacred. It binds not just her, but me, and through me, my warriors. You have friends among the Vryn now. Whatever comes, you will not face it alone. He held out his hand again. Help me find your people. Help me show the High Command that humans are worth respecting. Help me prevent a war that would hurt both our species. Day looked at the offered hand. This was a bigger choice than crossing a river. This was choosing the future, not just for himself but for every human who might encounter the Vryn Empire. But really, was there any choice at all? He had spent 12 years surviving. Maybe it was time to start living. He took Thorn's hand. I will help you, Day said. We will find them together. Outside the tent, the sun climbed higher in the sky. Lyra was recovering in medical care, her leg being properly healed with advanced technology. Dawn came slowly, turning the sky from black to gray to pale gold. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving everything wet and clean. Birds began their morning songs in the trees. Mist rose from the forest floor like smoke. Day woke from a light sleep and immediately checked on Lyra. She was still asleep, her breathing steady and even. Her leg looked better in the morning light. The swelling had reduced more. She would heal, given time and proper care. He built up the fire and stepped outside the cave to scout the area. The forest was beautiful in the early light, water droplets catching the sun like tiny diamonds on every leaf. For a moment, Day allowed himself to enjoy the peace. Then he heard them. At first it was just a feeling, a change in the air. The birds stopped singing. The forest went quiet in that particular way that meant predators were near. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Many footsteps, moving in perfect rhythm. The sound of trained soldiers on the march. Day's heart began to race. He ran back into the cave. "Lyra," he said urgently, shaking her shoulder. "Lyra, wake up." "They are coming." She opened her eyes, confused for a moment. Then she heard the footsteps, too. Her face went from sleepy to alert in an instant. She tried to stand, forgetting about her leg, and cried out in pain as she fell back down. Day looked from her to the cave entrance. He could run. Right now, before they arrived. He could disappear into the forest, vanish like he always had. The Vryn would never find him. He knew this land better than anyone, but Lyra could not run. She could barely move. If he left her, she would face her people alone. They would ask questions about where she had been, who had helped her. What would she tell them? More importantly, what kind of person would he be if he ran? Day took a deep breath and made his choice. He walked to the cave entrance and stood there, waiting. If he was going to die, he would die facing his fate, not running from it. The footsteps grew louder. Through the mist, figures began to appear. Tall shapes moving between the trees, 1, 5, 10, 20 more. They emerged into the clearing in front of the cave, and Day's breath caught in his throat. There were 50 of them, 50 Vryn warriors in full armor. They stood between 7 and 8 feet tall, their bodies powerful and built for war. Their armor was dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange markings on their skin glowed faintly, pulsing like slow heartbeats. Each warrior carried weapons that hummed with energy, advanced technology far beyond anything humans had achieved. They moved into formation with perfect precision, creating a semicircle around the cave entrance. Around Day. At the center of the formation stood their leader. He was bigger than the others, his armor covered in marks that Day guessed were symbols of rank and battles won. His face was hard as stone, his eyes burning with barely controlled fury. This was a man who had killed many times and would not hesitate to kill again. War Captain Thorn had found his daughter. The warriors raised their weapons. All pointed at Day. 50 weapons that could vaporize him in an instant. The humming grew louder, charging up. Day saw his death in their eyes. He did not move, did not run. He stood straight and met their leader's gaze. Thorn strode forward, towering over Day. He looked down at the human boy with barely disguised contempt. Then he spoke in a deep, rumbling voice. The words were in the Vryn language, harsh and commanding. Day did not understand, but the meaning was clear enough. "Where is she? What have you done?" Before Day could figure out how to respond, a voice called out from inside the cave. Lyra's voice, strong despite her pain. "Talvar." Every warrior froze. The words seemed to hit them like a physical force. Even Thorn stopped, his expression shifting from rage to shock. Lyra appeared at the cave entrance, dragging herself forward, using the wall for support. Her face was pale and covered in sweat from the effort, but her voice remained firm. She spoke rapidly in her language, gesturing at Day at her leg at the cave. The warriors listened in stunned silence. Thorn's face went through several emotions: disbelief, confusion, and slowly, unwillingly, understanding. Lyra pointed at Day and spoke one word again, louder this time. "Talvar!" Then she did something that made several warriors gasp. She pulled herself fully upright, balancing on her good leg, and touched her chest over her heart. She extended her hand toward Day in a formal gesture. "Talvar," she said a third time. Then she spoke in broken human standard language, words she must have learned from old recordings. "He saved life, oath-bound, sacred." Thorn stared at his daughter, then at Day, then back at his daughter. He spoke in a low voice, asking questions. Lyra answered, pointing at her splinted leg at the direction of the river, at Day's torn and bloody hands. The war captain walked to the cave entrance and looked inside. He saw the fire, the makeshift medical supplies, the blood on the floor where Lyra's leg had been treated, the drawings in the dust that told stories of loneliness and loss. He turned back to Day and studied him properly for the first time. Really looked at him. Saw the thin frame that still stood straight despite fear, the young face marked by years of hard survival, the hands that were calloused and scarred from work and fighting, the eyes that met his without looking away. Thorn spoke in his own language, questions directed at Lyra. She answered each one. The conversation went on for several minutes while Day stood frozen, waiting for judgment. Finally, Thorn turned back to Day. He spoke in careful human standard language, his accent thick but understandable. "You are D?" It was the first time Day had heard his name spoken by someone other than himself in 12 years. He nodded. "Yes, I am Day. You saved my daughter. From river. Risk death. Yes. Why?" It was a simple question, but Day knew his answer mattered. He thought about lying, about making himself sound heroic or calculated. But he had lived alone too long to remember how to lie well. "Because she needed help," Day said simply. "Because no one should die alone. Because it was the right thing to do." Thorn stared at him for a long moment. Then he said something in his own language. Several warriors made sounds of protest. A debate broke out among them. Day caught enough of the tone to understand they were arguing about him, about what to do with a human who had invoked their sacred life debt law. Lyra spoke up again, her voice cutting through the argument. She said something sharp and final. Then she pulled the small blade from her belt and showed them the cut on her palm. She pointed at the cave wall where her bloody handprint still marked the stone. More shocked silence. Thorn closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. Then he opened them and looked at Day again. "You know what Talvar means?" he asked. Day shook his head. "No." Lyra tried to explain, but we cannot speak each other's language well. "Talvar is sacred oath. Life debt. When someone saves your life, you owe them everything. Your service, your loyalty, your honor. This debt can never be fully repaid. It is bound by blood and witnessed by warriors." Thorn gestured at the handprint on the cave wall. "My daughter has sworn Talvar to you. In our culture, this is absolute. It cannot be broken. It cannot be denied." He paused, and something like respect entered his eyes. "But more than this, you risked your life for one of our people. You showed courage, skill, and compassion. These are qualities we honor above all others." Thorn took a breath and seemed to come to a decision. He turned to his warriors and spoke a command in their language. As one, they moved. 50 warriors lowered their weapons. 50 warriors placed their right fists over their hearts, and then, impossibly, they began to kneel. Thorn knelt first, his eyes never leaving Day's face. "Talvar," he said, "life debt. You have bound my daughter. You have bound me. You have bound us all." The forest floor shook as 50 armored warriors knelt before a thin human boy in ragged clothes. Day could not speak, could not move. This was impossible. This was not how the world worked. The strong did not kneel to the weak. Warriors did not bow to scavengers, but they were kneeling. All of them. Lyra spoke from the cave entrance, her voice proud despite her pain. "He is human," she said in her broken standard language, "but he is warrior too. He crossed Death River alone. He fight pain and fear. He sacrificed safety for stranger. This is Talvar. This is honor." Thorn rose to his feet. The warriors followed his lead, standing in perfect unison. "You have questions," Thorn said to Day. "We have questions. There is much to discuss. But first, medical care for my daughter. You will come with us, as honored guest, not prisoner." He held out his massive hand to Day. Day looked at the hand, at the kneeling warriors now standing at attention, at Lyra smiling at him despite her pain, at the dawn sun breaking through the mist and illuminating the forest in gold. He took Thorn's hand, and the world changed. The fire crackled and popped, filling the cave with warm orange light. Outside, rain began to fall, first as gentle drops, then as a heavy downpour that drummed against the rocks. Thunder rolled across the sky like distant drums. Day sat near the fire, watching Lyra. She had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her face tight with pain, even in unconsciousness. Her breathing was shallow and fast. The broken leg was swelling despite the splint. He knew he should do more for her, but he had no more supplies. No medicine. No proper tools. He added more wood to the fire and checked his remaining food. 2 pieces of dried meat, a handful of edible roots. Not much, but it would keep them alive for a day or 2. He hoped that would be enough time for her people to find her. Then what? Would they thank him? Or kill him for touching one of their own? Day pushed the thought away and focused on the present. He had learned long ago that worrying about tomorrow only made today harder. He pulled his knife and began carving a wooden cup from a piece of branch. There was a stream deeper in the cave system. If he could get water, at least they would not be thirsty. His hands moved automatically, shaping the wood with practiced ease. 12 years of survival had taught him how to make what he needed from whatever he could find. A sound made him look up. Lyra was awake, watching him work. Her eyes were clear now, no longer clouded with pain and fear. She studied his hands, his knife, the growing shape of the cup. She said something in her language. A question from the tone. Day held up the half-finished cup. Water, he said, miming drinking. She nodded, understanding. Then she pointed at the fire, at the cave walls, at his makeshift tools. She spoke again, longer this time. Her voice carried surprise, maybe confusion. Day wished desperately that they could talk. He wanted to explain that this was normal for him, that he had lived like this for most of his life, that humans could adapt and survive even when everything was taken from them. But words would not cross the gap between their languages. Instead, he finished the cup and went deeper into the cave. He returned with it full of clear, cold water. He knelt beside Lyra and offered it to her. She hesitated, then took it and drank. When she finished, she handed it back and spoke one word that sounded like gratitude. Day drank the rest himself, then set about preparing food. He spitted the meat on sticks and held them over the fire. The smell of cooking made his stomach growl. He had not eaten since morning. While the meat cooked, he crushed the roots into a paste. These roots were bitter but nutritious. More importantly, they helped reduce swelling and pain. He had discovered this after many painful experiments on himself. When everything was ready, he gave Lyra the larger portion of meat and half the root paste. She looked at the paste suspiciously, then at him. He ate his own portion first, showing her it was safe. She tried it and made a face at the bitter taste. But she ate it all. They ate in silence, watching the fire. The storm outside grew worse. Wind howled through the cave entrance. Lightning flashed, turning the world outside bright white for brief moments. After they ate, Lyra pointed at the ground and began drawing with her finger in the dust. She drew a circle, then small marks around it. Stars, Day realized. A planet with orbiting objects. Then she drew stick figures, tall ones. Vryn, he guessed. She pointed at the drawings, then at herself. Then she drew more figures marching in formation. Warriors. An army. Day's stomach tightened. So she was a soldier. Or a scout, more likely, given that she had been alone. Lyra drew more. A figure separated from the others. That was her. Then water, rocks, a broken line for her leg. The river accident. She pointed at all of this, then at Day, making a gesture he did not fully understand. But he got the basic idea. She was telling him her story. Now she pointed at him, a question in her eyes. Your turn, she seemed to say. Day hesitated. His story was long and painful. How could he draw 12 years of loneliness and survival in the dust? But he tried. He drew a big circle, many stick figures inside. The colony. Then he drew smaller circles. Ships. He showed the figures boarding the ships but left some behind, including 2 small figures, one even smaller than the other. Him and Lyra watched intently. Her eyes widened as understanding came. Day drew the ships leaving. Flying away. Never coming back. He drew the small figures alone. Then he crossed out the smallest one. Hana dead from fever. He drew a single figure walking away. Into trees. Into mountains. Alone. For years and years, shown by many marks in the dust. When he finished, silence filled the cave except for the fire and the rain. Lyra stared at the drawings. Then she looked at him with an expression he could not read. Shock, maybe, or sadness, or something else entirely. She spoke softly in her language. The words were gentle, almost a whisper. Then she reached out and touched the drawing of the smallest figure. Hana, She looked at Day with a question. "My sister," Day said quietly. "Hannah, she was 6. Lyra did not understand the words, but she understood loss. She placed her hand over her heart, then reached out and placed it over his. A gesture of shared grief. Day felt something break inside him. He had not cried in years. Not since Hannah died. Crying was a waste of water, a waste of energy. Survivors did not cry. But now, with this alien girl's hand on his chest, tears came, silent and hot, running down his face. He did not sob or shake. He just let them fall. Lyra did not move her hand. She sat with him while he grieved for his sister, for his lost family, for the child he had been before the world ended. When the tears stopped, Day wiped his face and looked at Lyra. She was crying too, he realized. Her tears were different than his, slightly luminescent in the firelight. But they were tears nonetheless. "Thank you," he said, knowing she would not understand but needing to say it anyway. She seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. She nodded. Then she did something strange. She pulled a small blade from her belt, one of the few items she still carried. She pressed it against her palm and drew it across, cutting deep. Blue-tinted blood welled up. Day reached for her hand, alarmed, but she shook her head. She pressed her bleeding palm against the cave wall, leaving a clear handprint. Then she spoke words that sounded formal and ceremonial. She turned to Day and pointed at the handprint, then at him. She repeated those serious words. Day did not know what this meant. Some kind of oath or promise in her culture, clearly. Something important. Lyra seemed frustrated by his lack of understanding. She tried different ways to explain, using gestures and expressions. Finally, she pointed at herself, then at him. She made a gesture like being bound together. She pointed at her heart, then at his. Life debt, Day guessed. She felt she owed him for saving her life. He shook his head. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "I helped because it was right, because you needed help." She did not understand his words, but seemed to understand his meaning. She shook her head firmly. "No." She spoke again, emphatic this time. Whatever this oath meant to her people, it was serious and binding. Day decided to let it go. If it made her feel better to make promises, who was he to argue? The rain continued through the night. Lyra's pain medicine wore off and she shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a position that did not hurt. Day gave her more of the root paste and tried to make her more comfortable with his thin blanket. As the night deepened, Lyra fell asleep again. This time her rest was deeper, more peaceful. The swelling in her leg had gone down a little. She would survive. Day sat by the fire, keeping watch. He fed the flames carefully, making sure they did not go out. The warmth and light were their protection against the cold darkness outside. He thought about tomorrow. The Vryn warriors would come. They would find this cave. They would find Lyra and him. What would happen then? Would they honor the life debt Lyra spoke of, or would they see him as an enemy? A weak human who had dared to touch one of their own. Day did not know. He had taken a risk saving Lyra, and now he would face the consequences. But as he looked at her sleeping peacefully by the fire, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever came tomorrow, at least he had not let her die alone in that river. At least he had been human. Outside, the storm raged on, and in the Vryn camp miles away, War Captain Thorn was giving orders to his 50 finest warriors. At dawn, they would march, and they would find whoever had taken his daughter. The morning sun climbed over the broken buildings of what used to be a human colony. Day moved through the ruins like a shadow, his bare feet making no sound on the cracked concrete. He was 19 years old, though he looked younger. Life in the wilderness had kept him thin and lean, his dark hair long and tangled, his clothes patched together from old materials he found in the abandoned buildings. He carried a spear made from a metal pole and a sharpened piece of steel. On his back hung a worn bag containing everything he owned in the world: a water bottle, a knife, some dried meat, a small blanket that had more holes than fabric. Day stopped at the edge of an old street and listened. The wind whispered through empty windows. Somewhere far away, a bird called out. But there was something else, something new. He crouched down and touched the ground, feeling vibrations his body had learned to read over 12 long years of survival. Heavy footsteps. Not human, not the animals he knew. Something different. Fear touched his heart like ice water. For 20 years, this planet had been empty of intelligent life, except for the few scattered humans who had been left behind. The forgotten ones. The children too sick to evacuate when the plague ships came. Day had been 7 when the last transport lifted off, leaving him standing in the rain with his little sister Hannah holding his hand. He pushed the memory away. Hannah was gone. Everyone was gone. Only the forgotten children remained, scattered across the wilderness, each surviving alone. But now something else had come to this world. Day moved carefully through the ruins, following signs only he could see. Broken branches. Disturbed dust. The faint smell of something metallic and strange. He climbed to the top of an old building and looked out across the valley. His breath caught in his throat. Ships. 3 of them, sitting in the fields beyond the old colony. They were unlike anything humans had built. Sleek and dark, covered in strange markings that seemed to glow faintly in the sunlight. Around the ships he could see movement. Tall figures much taller than humans moving with purpose. Aliens. Day's hand shook. He had heard stories from the old recordings he found in abandoned buildings. Stories of other species in the galaxy. The Vryn Empire, a race of warriors who conquered worlds and built vast kingdoms among the stars. They were said to be proud and fierce, viewing humans as weak creatures who ran from battle. If they found him, they would kill him. He was sure of it. Day climbed down from the building and moved quickly back into the forest. He needed to stay hidden. His survival camp was 10 miles away, deep in the caves where no one would find him. He would wait there. Maybe the aliens would leave. Maybe they would never know he existed. He traveled fast, using paths only he knew. The forest was thick here, full of tall trees and dense undergrowth. He had lived in these woods for so long that he knew every stream, every rocky hill, every safe place to hide. But as the sun began to set, something made him stop. Smoke. It was rising from the direction of Broken Ridge River, a dangerous waterway that cut through a deep gorge. The old colony bridge had collapsed years ago, leaving the 2 sides separated by churning white water and sharp rocks. Day stared at the smoke. Every instinct told him to run the other way. Smoke meant people. People meant danger. He should go to his camp, hide, and wait for the aliens to leave. But something pulled at him. A feeling he could not name. Curiosity, maybe, or loneliness, or the memory of Hannah's hand in his, small and trusting, before the fever took her. He changed direction and headed toward the river. The forest grew darker as he moved. The sound of rushing water filled his ears. Broken Ridge River was always angry, always loud, swollen from the rains that fell in the mountains. Day had crossed it only a few times in his life, and each time had nearly killed him. He reached the edge of the gorge and looked down, his heart stopped. There, on a rocky outcrop in the middle of the violent river, sat a figure. Even from this distance, Day could see it was not human. Too tall, wrong shape. One of the aliens from the ships, but something was wrong. The figure was not moving much. As Day watched, he saw why. The alien's leg was bent at a terrible angle. Broken. The water was rising, lapping at the edges of the rock. Soon the outcrop would be underwater. The alien was going to die. Day should leave. This was not his problem. The aliens were invaders, maybe enemies. Why should he risk his life for one of them? But as he watched, the alien looked up. Even across the distance, Day could see the face. Young. Female, he thought, though it was hard to tell with aliens. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, Day saw something he recognized. Fear. Pain. The desperate hope of someone who did not want to die alone. She looked exactly how he had felt when Hannah died in his arms. Day closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought about running away. He thought about his safe cave, his quiet life, his survival. He had worked so hard to stay alive. 12 years of hunting, hiding, enduring. All of it would mean nothing if he died trying to save an alien who might kill him the moment he got close. But then he thought about Hannah, about the adults who had stayed behind so the children could board the evacuation ships, about sacrifice and what it meant to be human. He opened his eyes and looked at the alien girl again. The water was higher now. She had minutes, not hours. Day dropped his bag and started looking for rope. The old colony had left behind many things. Day knew where to find them. He ran to a nearby storage shed, half collapsed but still standing. Inside he found what he needed. Climbing rope, old but strong, metal spikes, a harness. He worked fast, his hands steady even though his mind was screaming at him to stop. He tied knots the way his father had taught him long ago, before the plague, before the evacuation, before everything fell apart. The alien girl was watching him now. She called out something in a language he did not understand. Her voice was rough with pain and fear. "I am coming," Day said, even though she could not understand him either. "Just hold on." He hammered the first spike into solid ground and tied the rope to it. Then he tied the other end around his waist. The river roared below, hungry and cold. Day took one last look at the forest behind him, at his safe world, his hidden life. Then he stepped over the edge and began to climb down toward the alien girl and whatever fate waited for him in the churning waters below. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky red and gold. In the distance, unknown to Day, 50 Vryn warriors were preparing to search for their missing scout. War Captain Thorne stood at the head of his forces, his face set in grim determination. His daughter Lyra had been missing for 6 hours, and dawn was coming. The rope cut into Day's hands as he lowered himself down the rocky cliff face. The river roared beneath him, spraying cold water that soaked his clothes and made his fingers numb. Each movement had to be careful. One mistake and he would fall into the churning white water below. He reached the bottom of the cliff and stood on a narrow ledge of rock. The alien girl's outcrop was 20 feet away, separated by violent rapids that crashed against sharp stones. The water was rising fast. Already it covered half the rock where she sat. Day looked at her closely for the first time. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that had a faint glow to it like moonlight on water. Her face was similar to human but different. Larger eyes, sharper features. Her hair was long and dark, now wet and plastered to her head. She wore strange armor that was cracked and broken. Her leg bent wrong below the knee and blood stained the rock beneath her. She stared at him with wide eyes. Fear and confusion mixed on her face. She said something in her harsh musical language. A question, maybe, or a warning. "I do not understand," Day called over the water's roar. He pointed at her, then at himself, then at the shore behind him. "I help you. Understand?" She tilted her head, studying him. Then she nodded slowly. One hand moved to her belt and pulled out something that looked like a weapon. She tossed it into the water. A gesture of trust. Day felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this would work. He looked around and started forming a plan. The outcrop was too far to reach with the rope alone. The current was too strong to swim. But there were other rocks between them, smaller ones barely breaking the surface. If he could get a line across them, create a bridge of sorts. He searched his pockets and found 3 metal spikes he had brought. Not enough for a bridge, but maybe enough for something else. Day hammered the first spike into a crack in his ledge. Then he tied one end of a second rope to it. He coiled the rest of the rope in his hand, judging the weight and distance. He had one chance at this. He threw. The rope sailed across the gap and landed short, falling into the water. The current grabbed it and pulled it downstream. Day hauled it back hand over hand, his shoulders burning. The alien girl watched him. She tried to move and gasped in pain, her face going pale. Her broken leg would not support her weight. "Stay still," Day said, even though she could not understand the words. He hoped his tone would carry the meaning. He tried again. This time he threw harder. The rope arced through the spray and landed on the outcrop. The girl grabbed it with both hands and held tight. "Good," Day breathed. "Good." Now came the hard part. He tied the rope around his waist again and checked the knots twice. Then he stepped into the river. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The current pulled at his legs, trying to drag him downstream. The rocks under his feet were slippery and sharp. He moved slowly, testing each step. The water rose to his knees. His waist, his chest halfway across, his foot slipped. The current caught him and pulled him under. Water filled his mouth and nose. He could not see, could not breathe. The rope around his waist went tight and his ribs screamed in pain, but the rope held. Day clawed his way back to the surface, gasping and coughing. His hands found the rope that connected him to the outcrop. He pulled himself forward hand over hand, no longer trying to walk. The water battered him against rocks. Something cut his forehead and blood ran into his eyes, but he kept pulling. His hand touched stone, the outcrop. He dragged himself up onto it, lying flat and breathing hard. Everything hurt. His vision swam. The alien girl was staring down at him. She said something in a soft voice. It might have been "thank you" or "you are crazy" or "who are you?" He could not tell. Day sat up and looked at her leg. It was bad. The bone was definitely broken, maybe in 2 places. He had set bones before, animals mostly. Once his own arm after a fall, but never anything this serious. He opened his bag and pulled out his knife and the small medical kit he carried. It was not much. Cloth for bandages, a needle and thread, some herbs that helped with pain and infection. "This will hurt," he told her. She watched his face and seemed to understand. Day cut away the armor around her leg. The skin beneath was swollen and dark. He tore his spear apart and used the straight pieces as splints. Then, as gently as he could, he straightened her leg. She screamed. The sound was raw and terrible. Her hands clenched into fists and her whole body went rigid. But she did not pull away. She let him work. He tied the splints in place and wrapped her leg in all the cloth he had. It was not perfect, but it would keep the bone from moving. She would live. Maybe even walk again if she got proper care. The water was at their feet now. The outcrop was almost gone. "We have to move," Day said. "Now." He tied the rope around her waist and then around his own. He could not carry her. She was too big, too heavy. But he could help her balance. "Together," he said, holding out his hand. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Her grip was strong despite her pain. They moved into the water together. Day went first, feeling for safe rocks with his feet. She hopped on her good leg, leaning on him for support. The current pulled at them viciously. Twice they almost fell. Each time, Day's rope to the shore saved them. It took forever. The sky was growing dark. The cold made both of them shake. But step by step, rock by rock, they crossed the river. When they finally reached the ledge where Day had started, the alien girl collapsed. She was breathing hard, her face twisted in pain, but she was alive. Day climbed the rope back up the cliff, then pulled her up after him. His muscles screamed. His hands bled. But he did not stop until they were both on solid ground. Night had fallen. The girl was shivering violently. Day knew they needed shelter and warmth. He also knew the alien warriors would be looking for her. They needed to hide. "Can you walk at all?" he asked. She tried to stand and fell immediately. Her leg could not support any weight. Day looked at her, then at the forest. His camp was too far, but there were caves nearby, old mining tunnels from when the colony was active. He knew one that was safe and dry. He bent down and helped her get one arm over his shoulders. She was heavy, but he managed. Together they stumbled into the forest. Behind them, the river continued its endless roar. The outcrop where the girl had been trapped was now completely underwater, invisible in the darkness. They reached the cave as the last light faded from the sky. Day helped the girl sit against the wall, then gathered wood for a fire. His hands shook as he worked the flint and steel. Finally, a spark caught. Flames grew, pushing back the darkness and cold. In the firelight, the girl looked at him. Really looked at him. Her eyes were strange colors, shifting between purple and blue. She said one word in her language. Then she pressed her hand to her chest. "Lyra," she said. It was her name. Day understood. He touched his own chest. "Day," he said. She repeated it, her accent making it sound different but recognizable. Then she held out her hand, palm up. He did not know what it meant, but he placed his hand in hers. She squeezed gently and said something long in her language. The words were serious, heavy with meaning. An oath, maybe. Or a promise. Day squeezed back. He did not know what he had just agreed to. He did not know that in Vryn culture, he had just accepted a life debt that could never be repaid. Outside the cave, the wind picked up. Storm clouds gathered in the sky, and somewhere in the darkness, 50 warriors were preparing to march at dawn.